Good morning. Good morning. I just got to say, we're here for innovating global food supply chains. And I know President Clinton told us not to be overly nostalgic. He admonished us to think about the future, but boy, it's hard on the last day of the last CGI not to think this is the sort of session that would never happen anywhere else. You know, we've got people from industry, we've got people who are just experts in agriculture geeks, you might even call them, all together in one room to talk about really the detail, the substance, to get into the issue. And that's what we're going to do for the next hour and a half. We couldn't do without all of you. We couldn't do without CGI. So I don't know what we're going to do next year. But I just want to say thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to a great discussion. To kick us off, though, to remind us what makes CGI so unique, we have a commitment maker. And I want to invite him to the stage, Lucas Simmons from Scope Insight. So I'm going to tell you something you all know in this room, that smallholder farmers play an important role in producing most of the food consumed in the neediest parts of the world. However, smallholders face a variety of challenges that impede their growth, limit their ability to contribute their crops to global food supply chains. The smallholders often lack the necessary professional skills to connect them to those supply chains, to grow the improved products, to really get higher prices for themselves. And the challenges that they face can be attributed to illiteracy, to poor technical and accounting skills, and to lack of production knowledge that leads to the lower quantity and lower qualities at the end of what they produce. But the gentleman standing next to me and his team are addressing this. This is what they're doing in their commitment. They are announcing a new commitment called AMEA, which is Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance. Most people would have tuned out by that long name, but you guys are all very interested in this, so you know, Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance. And Scope Insight is going to address these challenges by improving the professionalism of those same smallholder farmers and better connecting them to the other actors in the agricultural value chain. AMEA will leverage Scope Insight's tools for diagnosing farmer capacity building needs. It's going to let NGOs provide targeted support to the farmers and generate the critical data that we need on farmer capacity for the commodity traders, for the service providers, for the financial lenders, and for the other actors working with smallholders in the supply chain. So a lot of useful data will come out of this. Scope Insight and AMEA's other founding members, and there are several, includes the International Finance Corporation, ICCO, ACDI VOCA, NCBA, CLINSA, I think I'm reading Lucas's handwriting, VECO, ABNA AMRO, Argadins, and IDH. So a number of organizations have come together to share the farmer data openly among AMEA members in order to enable the full ecosystem of supply chain actors to work effectively with smallholders. And their work aims to have a direct impact on at least 150,000 farmers in the next 4 years. So this is a really ambitious commitment. Thank you so much for bringing it to us today. Thank you. Hang on one second. I think there's a certificate which will come up, I believe, and we'll take a photograph. Or maybe it's right here. Look at that. Look at that. They're way ahead of me. I've been coming to enough CGIs, I should know. I'd like to invite the fellow panelists to take the stage. And as they are doing that, I'm just going to give you a couple of thoughts about what this conversation is really about and why this moment in time matters so much. I think, as many people in this room know, there's about 1.3 billion tons of food that gets wasted annually. So we have so much innovation happening in the world. We see this in many exciting places in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, and so many discussions that happen at CGI. And yet, we're still faced with a lot of the same challenges we've been dealing with in the agricultural industry and with small-scale farmers for many, many years. We're here to talk about how we can actually address and solve some of those issues. And the good news is that there are many people working at a very deep level on this, including the commitment maker we just heard from. There are a lot of new technologies that are available. There are new financing models to make those possible, including allowing smallholders to get access to credit and savings and insurance products. There are big efforts underway to reduce the food and environmental waste that happens so much throughout the world using things like cold chains and integrated distribution channels. So we're going to hear a lot about that today. And there are a lot of investment opportunities to invest directly in women-friendly farming techniques that support women's land ownership and water rights. So we're going to talk about some of those issues today. We're going to have a panel discussion about it, and then we're going to break into a group-facilitated discussion to get all of you engaged in this. I know there's a lot of expertise in the room as well. So let me just briefly mention who we are here to talk about this panel today. We've got Erthrin Cousin, the Executive Director of the World Food Program, T.R. Kesavan, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Tractors and Farm Equipment Limited, and Zia Khan, the Vice President, Initiatives and Strategy at the Rockefeller Foundation. A fantastic group to get into this discussion. And I wanted to start first with Erthrin. I think people in this room know Erthrin well. And you are a personal hero to me and the people in our community, the global development community. Obviously, everyone who's run the World Food Program has had a big responsibility. But given where we are in today's world, the unprecedented level of crisis, of displacement, of need, the World Food Program is playing an absolutely critical role. So maybe just to help us set the stage for a second, can you give us a sense of where we are when you think about the global food supply chain? I know there's a lot of initiatives you have underway, but before we even get into those initiatives, give us a sense of where we are as a global community on this issue.
Well, when I talk about the issue, I talk about the poorest people, as you know. That's who WFP focuses on. And when I talk about the poorest people, I'm talking about the people who are food insecure, 795 million people who don't know where their next meal is going to come from. We have 40% of all of the food that is harvested in sub-Saharan Africa is lost through waste, poor post-harvest handling. Let me put that into perspective for you. If we could capture all of the food that's lost through poor post-harvest handling and the subsequent waste because of that handling, that's more than all the food aid that's brought into the continent on an annual basis. So that solving that one problem equals all of the food that we bring onto the continent. So that's significant. And the challenge is that we talk about achieving the sustainable development goal of Goal 2 of zero hunger during a period of time when we have, I'm just coming from General Assembly, 65 million people who are refugees. We have the challenge of conflicts that limit the ability of people to feed themselves, whether we're talking Syria or Yemen or South Sudan, the challenges in Northeast Nigeria, all of those things affect the access, not only the access to food, but the availability of food. And so what we're looking at WFP is how do we do what the world expects from WFP, and that is ensure that we're saving lives. But also, since in addition to those that I've talked about in conflict, 80% of the people that we serve are also, they live in climate marginal places. So what is it that we can do to support the agricultural development activities that are necessary to reduce the risk of loss to those who live in those climate marginal places that will ultimately help people feed themselves? Because that's what this is all about.
And innovation is really key to that. As you say, most of the people who are displaced, the 65 million, a lot of it really is about conflict, and that's what we see in the news. But there's going to be a big trend toward climate refugees. And so what that means for us as a community is we've got to really change the way we operate. And I know that's something you at WFP, you're doing. Before I bring in the other panelists, I just want to get into this point a little bit more. You know, we tend to think of food aid and we think of the bags of grain coming off of a truck. And obviously that's still an important component, but I know that WFP now is doing so much more in cash-based transfers. I'm not sure everyone's aware of that. Maybe you can just give us a minute on what is that you're doing today?
Well, even before I get to that, I need to make sure that people understand that when we talk, even when we talk about food aid, we're purchasing a significant amount of the food aid that we distribute in the developing world itself. It is not about food that's being transported from Europe and the United States. It's also about food that we're purchasing that supports market development. Once you develop markets, then people need to have when food's available, they need to have access to that food. And the poorest people oftentimes don't have access to food that is available, and so we provide cash-based transfers. And those that we call it cash-based transfers because in some places it is actually cash that we're giving, more often mobile cash than actually hard currency. But we also have vouchers in situations where providing access to foods in markets we can support brokers by guaranteeing them a certain amount of sale. They will bring in food food into hard-to-reach places, that we then make that food available to those we serve through vouchers. But what's great about that is when they bring in that food, it then makes food available for purchase to those who have access to capital.
Yeah, that's a great theme we're going to keep coming back to, which is how do you get the local farmer in the place, engaged. And I think it's a good way to bring in our next panelist, Kesavan, because Kesavan, I'm not sure, maybe first you can just say a word about your company and the scale of it. I'm not sure everyone is familiar. Give us a sense of how big your company is and in what areas you operate.
Thank you, Raj. See, I work for TAFE, Tractors and Farm Equipments Limited, a company operated out of India for the last 57 years. We are the third largest tractor manufacturer in the world by volume. We are also associated with ACCO, which is the Atlanta-based company. We manufacture the Massey Ferguson tractors for both for India and also part of the world. And we have our own brands like TAFE and Aisha. Aisha used to be a German brand, which was taken over, and then we bought over that company. So we do something like 170,000 tractors a year, plus equipments, and we have a very large presence in Africa.
And one of the reasons that's so important in this discussion is we're talking about the needs today, but those needs are growing. And part of that is population growth, including in countries like India. And so getting yield up, increasing productivity, mechanization is absolutely core to this discussion. Tell us about what your company is doing, particularly the J Labs, and what that means for productivity in farmers.
See, when we started this company, immediately after 2 years, we started the J Farm activity. One of the reasons we started was, when tractors came into India, I think I'm explaining to somebody, my dealers used to go in cycles to sell tractors. And people used to wonder, because there was no automobiles, things were very different. Farmers were very much hesitant to even buy the tractors and put it on the land. And they still believed that that's going to be damage to the land. So we had to create a system where we need to educate farmers. So at that time, we believed that the only way to do it is create a knowledge transfer base, wherein we listen to what people want, we give them agronomic services, we tell them what to cultivate, how to use the tractor, and what is the ways to spread the knowledge among farmers, not as a preacher, but more as a doer, so that they know what we are doing. And we did this for the last 55, 60 years. We have been doing this across India. And it's happy to share that we are now taking this across to other parts of the world like Africa. At least 5 or 6 countries we are going in and doing this as a development activity from our side.
And can you just talk a little bit more about the gap in mechanization? What is the demand for mechanization versus the people who actually out there don't have it today?
See, let me clarify one point here is, I'm really going to people today who are not big or who are not really farmers. Many places where I go in the world, in Africa, people are really doing or trying to do farming with their hands. So they have no clue what the mechanization is. So we are trying to spread into areas what we learned in India. It was a difficult journey in India, but I think that we can actually leapfrog and jump when we go into Africa. So what we really do is we go into clusters. We create clusters of 100 or 200 farmers which are having maybe 2 acres, 2.5 acres of land, and give them a mechanization and the agronomy package. In fact, we go there and talk to farmers to understand what can be grown best there. Not that what they are today growing, but can we do something different? Our first objective is to ensure that there is a self-sustainability for the farmer within that group. The next thing is that how do we engage the young farmers? One of the biggest problems we are facing is how to get the young farmers to be in the field. We have a very similar experience in India, where the youngest farmer or the new breed of farmer don't want to be in the field for a simple reason. One, they don't think it is prestigious enough to do agriculture. Number two, they don't think there is enough money in agriculture. And more importantly, you can't give them 60 or 70 days of work and ask them not to do anything for 300 days. So the most important aspect what you have found out is give them a prestige, which I think we can do for mechanization. Let me share a personal experience. I used to go very often, fly through the Delhi airport. 11 years back, I see the people who clean the Delhi airport used to have a mop and they literally mop it. I used to go, I have a habit, I used to go and talk to them and said, hey buddy, how do you find this? He said, I hate the job. I mean, he thought that what he's doing is the lowest of the jobs. Then the complete Delhi airport called modernized, the new airport came in, and incidentally, I met the same boy, now driving a sweeping machine. So he waved at me and he was so happy. He said, what's the difference? You're still doing the same job. But only thing is, he thinks now he is doing a job which is much more ego satisfying. This is precisely what you're trying to bring to the farmers. Give them appropriate mechanization so that that will help them to feel that they are doing something. Number two, we are trying to give them a round the year job in the sense that we have, the way we lay out the land is we have short duration crops, long duration crops. We also manage water. So this fellow has got something to do around the year. Plus he also makes some money almost every week or every 10 days. There is some kind of revenue coming into him. Third, but not the least, we were succeeded in a big way to bring back women into farming. One of the things, the statistics back in India, which I'm sure is going to be similar to Africa, says that when things are bad, they are really having difficult times, women come into farming. But as the prosperity comes in, the women go back to their jobs in their houses or something else. But by bring appropriate mechanization, one good thing we could do was women find it easy to do the job. They are now back in the field. And believe me, many of the farms in India, they probably do a better job than men, especially the small size. I'm not really talking the big farms, I'm really talking about the very small farms.
Thank you. I want to get back into that issue, but I want to bring Zia Khan into the discussion because this is a broad-ranging discussion. We've now heard a couple of pieces of it, but obviously there's improving the productivity of land, getting more yield, improving the quality of the products that farmers grow, the post-harvest yield losses, reducing those. It's a complex system. You look at that whole system in your role at the Rockefeller Foundation. So help us think through what do you see today as the big opportunities to address inefficiencies in that system?
Sure, thanks, Raj, and good morning, everyone. You know, the word system is so key, and I think that's so central that even within agriculture, you have to think about the system, but agriculture sits in a system as well. It's cultural, it's economic, it's political, it's social, and that's something that we always have to keep in mind, and that's why I'm really looking forward to the breakout session where we'll apply some good system thinking to this problem. And that's been the Rockefeller Foundation's perspective for 100 years. So starting way back in 1910, and don't worry, I won't go year by year through our history, but we got involved in agriculture because we were trying to improve education in the rural South here in the United States, realized that the schools just didn't have enough money, they needed a greater tax base, and agriculture was the dominant industry in the South. So by improving agricultural productivity, it was a means to improve rural economic development that would then help education. And that's been a theme through our history, which is what is the pressing issue and how do we take a systems perspective? Moving into the Green Revolution in the 1950s and 60s, that was a big system effort that helped save 1 billion people and feed 1 billion people, for which Norman Borlaug, who many of you probably have heard of, won the Nobel Prize. We then started to realize that climate change was affecting traditional agricultural practices and seeds, and how could we work on climate change resilience for agriculture. More recently, a partnership with the Gates Foundation in Africa to bring Green Revolution to Africa. And our latest focus in agriculture has been, as you mentioned, on post-harvest losses. And there's a sort of amazing, it's the amazing problem that not many people have heard of. And there's sort of a game that I call the statistics bingo of who can come up with the most shocking framing of this. And some of my favorite ones are, in this country, 20% of fresh water goes into food that we throw out, which is amazing when you think of the challenges we're facing in the West End drought. Families throw out about $2,000 a year of food, which is critical when you think about the income mobility challenges that we're having. Greenhouse gas emissions, all of that, and the statistics that you were sharing in Africa, about 40% of loss. So what we've been looking at, and this is a very interesting situation, the challenge is not that we don't know the solutions. Simple solutions like putting bananas in a plastic crate when you put them in a truck, or storing grain in hermetically sealed bags, these will all make dramatic differences. But the question is, how do you distribute these technologies? How do you get the behavior change among farmers so that they'll adopt these technologies? How do you get them access for the financing to pay for these technologies? And most importantly, how do you connect them to markets so they have a way to sell their surplus food as well? So you can't really isolate the challenge of post-harvest loss. It fits within the broader agricultural system, and this is something we were talking about before the panel of how do you draw the lines of this. But we feel it's a very promising entry point into, first of all, taking advantage of all the waste and redeploying it so that smallholder farmers can earn more income, so we produce less waste, so that we save water. But also, how does this help catalyze agricultural transformation in general?
We've covered this quite a bit at DevX, and one of the things we found is there's so many social entrepreneurs doing really exciting things, inventing a new way to dry grains or to store grains, low-cost solutions designed for smallholder farmers. But it feels like we haven't yet gotten to scale, the kind of perennial question. Do you feel that's something we can do today? Is there a reason why we're in a moment here and have this session here today at CGI? Is there a moment in time now where scale is possible in a way it wasn't before? How do you look at this at Rockefeller?
I agree we're exactly at that moment. And I think this is the common challenge of all social entrepreneurs, which is they can only scale their organizations so far before they need to connect with government policies and before you need to connect with markets and large companies to get that transformation to happen. So that, I think, is the interesting point that we're facing now. There really isn't a need for, well, I shouldn't say this, there's always a need for improvements and innovations and technologies, but the solutions are there. The ideas are there. It's how do we coordinate all of them together to get the big tip in the system and get to a new state.
Earther, I want to get your thoughts on that because you at World Food Program work very directly with a lot of these small-scale farmers. You referred to it before. You're doing it in some of the toughest places in the world where there is a crisis, and you want to make sure the economy there can bounce back, people can have employment again, so you're buying locally. What do you see as you look at the suppliers to World Food Program? Do you see this kind of innovation coming? Do you think we're at a moment in time?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And as I listen to the other panelists, I'm sitting here, because the reality is that these are different pieces of the solution of the system solution that is required. If we look at what is necessary, it is simultaneous improvement of the agricultural value chain in a way that will support smallholder farmers or any farmers' ability to increase the quality and quantity of their yield, have the kind of infrastructure support that is required for them to move and store product. It's also about having sustainable and durable markets. And all of that requires, as was stated, the kind of policy systems in place that will support the achievement of these sustainable solutions. What does that mean? We've created at WFP what we call the patient procurement platform. Everybody hates the name, but if you think about patient investors, those are the investors that are willing to come in, put in money, and know that they're going to have a bigger return on the back end, but it's maybe slower getting there. And that's exactly what we're saying. If we bring all of the tools that are necessary, the seeds that farmers require, the access to training, the access to mechanization where it's appropriate, the access to credit, the access to insurance, access to post-harvest storage tools, as well as the market, then we can begin to make the improvements that are required for those farmers to create the sustainable economic opportunity. So we tested this in Zambia. I'm sorry, in Tanzania with 26,000 farmers in the last harvest. And what we saw was 100% increase in smallholder receipts. We saw no side selling from farmers, which is a huge problem when we start talking about supply chain. We saw 7 of the largest brokers in the country involved in supporting the market. Because why did they come? Because WFP catalyzed the market. We purchase about $1.2 billion of food a year. And so we're committed now that at least 10% of that, $120 million per year, will purchase from smallholders, giving us the ability to support all of the work that goes into creating that value chain improvement, and then having a known buyer at the end. But what's important is that we have private sector that's also willing to come in as a buyer so that we can step out. Because if it's just WFP, then it's just a program. That's how you get to scale, is when you know that all of these tools are private sector tools, they're market driven, so they're there long after it becomes, long after the funding ends, and that you have a marketplace that is going to also stay in place. That's when it's scalable. So next harvest, we already have 50,000 farmers signed up and 9 brokers that are prepared to come on board. The one point I need to make is that every country is not going to come along at the same pace. We're not going to have the capacity to scale in South Sudan the way we can scale in Tanzania. And so what we need to do is ensure that we also have government participation so that that policy framework that is necessary to support these kinds of investments, as well as to support the market development, is in place, and you have a governance structure that can support it.
I want to talk about the money a little bit, because I understand you're obviously a big buyer, World Food Program. You talked about the private sector broadly, and there's, we all hear about huge corporations now that are trying to engage down to even the smallholder farmer level, companies like PepsiCo or Unilever or Starbucks. So there seems to be money in the market and interest in the marketplace. How does that individual farmer figure out how to finance a tractor, or figure out how to finance these new innovations that we're talking about? Have the financial models gotten to the point yet where the small-scale farmer can actually find a way to access this more modern agricultural system? Kesavan.
Raj, I think it's a very pertinent question. I think let me start answering this from the Indian perspective, which I think we have today 600,000 tractors going to the market every year. If you really go back to the Green Revolution time, it was the government agencies who actually funded farmers from 7 to 9 years kind of funding. Interestingly, they said the funding will be at the normal interest rates. It was not a preferential interest rate, but they gave a long period. A lot of people said that what you're doing is wrong at that time. But I think what we find out now is all the 600,000 tractors being made in this country today are now funded by private banks. And that is caught on pretty well. That is one part. Let me park it there. See, we are talking about the people who can afford. And there is a lot of renting of tractors going on very unorganized manner. A lot of this renting tractors and equipment happen in the local areas. But there is, all said and done, there is one area of difficulty. A lot of there are two kinds of farmers in India. One is some people own land, some people actually who don't own land but work on the land as a farmer. The problems is there. How do they get a tractor or equipment for doing their marginal farming?
They can't use their land as collateral for a loan.
They can, but I don't think they really want to. They really want to get mechanization done. So there is two kind of different people. The trouble here is that the chap who's having a tractor, when he's willing to do his land, he expects money upfront. The credit system is what actually really runs in this market. So somebody need to give him a credit or enable him to do this, and they're really small. So one of the system what has really come in by the government, I think it's a very good system, is now they are working with the private people like us to create renting agencies which will actually cater to the needs of these kind of people. The question comes, how do they get money? Remember one thing, I think India is really progressed well on IT. And one example I can give for this is, I submitted my income tax return in month of August, and I got my refund last month, which is amazing by any standard, I'm sure. So if this can happen to my money, I'm sure that we can do much more with the poor people. So what the government has started doing it is, they have completely putting all the farmers into the Aadhaar net, which I think 95% of Indians are already covered now. Now, this tells you who is a marginal farmer and who is not a marginal farmer. So if the Aadhaar fellow is renting a tractor from me, he doesn't pay a single pie. The cost of that renting it gets directly paid to the owner of that particular rental agency. And it's not big money, actually. I think it is per hectare, you are charging something like $50. That's the job being done. So this is the system what is working in. It's going to take some time to make this available for every farmer, but I get a feeling that 2 to 3 years down the road, you'll find that this system will catch on. We are all getting into a net kind of a solution so that people can, whether you have a smartphone or a non-smartphone, you can send a message and get everything done for as far as the farming is concerned. Now, this is the same model. Because we believe this model can work and it actually start linking up people, this is some of the models we are planning to take into Africa. But I get a feeling most of the areas where we are going to Africa, it's a little too early because we are really going one step below and putting people, working closely with the farmers or the so-called farmers, they're not really farmers, and trying to help them to achieve some basic sustainability. So it is basically people, technology, and knowledge sharing what's going to work there.
Zia, what are you seeing around these financial models that directly help the small-scale farmer?
So it's a great question. And when we look at this, the encouraging news is everyone's interests are aligned towards the same thing. The challenge is when you think of it as a market, there's a lot of chicken and egg problems. And how do you solve those? Which have to do with just building trust and confidence among the different actors. So let's look at Kenya and the mango value chain there. Coca-Cola has an interest in smallholder farmers because they want a regular and steady high-quality supply of mangoes. But the problem is they don't know how to contract with them or interact with them. Smallholder farmers would be interested in contracting with Coca-Cola, they just don't know how to do it. And so therefore they don't exactly know how to get the formal contracts. Without a formal contract, they don't have the collateral to get financing. And the financiers want a credit guarantee because they're just not used to this market and they don't understand what the returns could be. If they were to get that financing, farmers could then buy inputs, but the input providers need some kind of aggregation because they can't distribute to every single farmer. So everyone's interests are aligned. They're just these little failures that happen everywhere. And this is some of the work that we're trying to do, which is how can we try and address these simultaneously? And how can we as a foundation use our limited but flexible funding to support some pilots, to provide some guarantees, to help create those connections? I think once people get used to this and we can start to get the confidence that the smallholder farmers will supply to Coca-Cola, and if the price spikes, they're not just going to go to the local market and therefore reduce the predictability of the supply, then I think we'll start to see things take off. But this, I believe, is really where the creativity is needed right now, which is how can we overcome some of these they're many, they're interconnected, they're surmountable, but there are a lot of these little challenges.
Earther, if we can just end on you, and I want to add one last thing to the table because we got limited time, and then I want to hear what you think. But I recently, in the last couple of years, I've visited farmers in Malawi and Ethiopia and Kenya, and one of the things that strikes me listening to this discussion is most of them that I've spoken to, it's not a static set of circumstances for them. You know, one year, some of the farmers I met had a particular type of disease that hit their maize. Another year there was floods. The next year there was droughts. We mentioned climate right at the beginning of the discussion. So how does that overlay of a volatile climate address, some of the things we're talking about? Are there insurance products? What are you at World Food Program looking at?
Right. When I talked about the patient procurement platform, it really attempts to address the challenges that have been identified by both of the other speakers. And you have the first 7 partners who are working together: Yara, Syngenta, Bayer, Rabobank, bringing in the credit that we're talking about. We have Cargill as a market buyer, Agra, which is the training tool to support that aggregation of farmers on the front end that you were identifying, IFC to support some of the credit guarantee work, bringing them all together, committed to supporting this outcome of creating a sustainable agricultural value chain. That's what's required, is that level of commitment, because each one of these, none of these organizations other than AGRA and WFP are in the nonprofit business. The rest of them are in the for-profit business, but they see the potential opportunity of getting this right. So bringing all the partners together to ensure that you can have all the tools that are necessary, supported by government policies that will ensure their ability to get paid at the end will keep private sector involved. And it's working. So you lay over on that the challenges that you've identified, the challenges of climates when the rains don't come or when too much rain comes. And a lot of that has to do with having drought-tolerant seeds or drought-resistant seeds to ensure that you have the right, you're planting the seeds that will support the changes in climate. It also requires a kind of diversification that we were talking about. And Malawi is a country where the president and I have had many conversations about moving away from every farmer planting maize and moving towards more planting of pulses and other root crops that have the ability to withstand some of the climate impacts. So it's bringing all of this knowledge and information together with these right partners who can bring the right tools that are necessary to support a particular context. And when we get it right, it works, but it requires patience. And so what we need are private sector actors who are willing to recognize the opportunity and to support this with a patient attitude. Thank you.
Thank you. And now's the time we're going to bring all of you into this discussion. We've really just scratched the surface here on what is a very complex topic. Zia talked about the need for systems thinking, and I can't think of anybody better to lead us in a new way of thinking about these problems than Jocelyn Wyatt, who's our group work facilitator, and she is the co-lead and executive director at IDEO.org.
Thank you, guys. Thank you to our speakers. Thanks, Raj. So as Raj mentioned, this session for the next 30 minutes or so is really an opportunity for you to connect with others in the room, to discuss innovations and how we might scale some of these innovations related to the global food supply chain. So we're going to start off and just have everyone at the table introduce yourselves to each other, share a little about your organization and the work that you're doing in this area. And then there are worksheets on each of the tables that have 3 areas for discussion, and you can select one or multiple of those discussion topics to have with the others at your table. There are 3 discussions. The first is how might we scale technology to improve yields for farmers? The second is how might we provide farmers access to financing? And the third is how might we increase farmers' access to global markets? So I'll ask you in about 30 minutes to share back some of the things that you discussed at your tables, and we'll bring the panel back up to reflect on the discussions that each of you had at your tables. If you're at a table that only has a few people, you might want to move to a table to fill out the table and form a larger group. Otherwise, if you're happy having smaller group conversations, that's fine as well. So with that, I'll leave it to you to discuss some of the things that you heard from our panel and some of your own experiences. Thanks so much.
to the, like, you know, however million people are in this situation, like, that change seems to be a difficult thing to do several taken on by the women, and all, the gain comes, and it's a modest return to the investors, but still, like, and so that's why I just sort of feel like, is that such a fair relationship if, they only sweep in when it's successful, and it's like, I don't know, like, that's kind of,
But in that 5 minutes, I'm going to ask one person from your group to share an idea that you've come up with using one of these three methods.
Do 10 things, 8 are going to fail and 2 are going to work.
I think from a brand perspective also, these supply chains are necessary. We don't necessarily have visibility into. And so I'm just hearing you speak and
Sorry, can I just interrupt for a second? In about 5 minutes, I'm going to allow your group to share back with our panel one idea that you come up with.
you're not making it very hard.
Such a compelling, like I have that visibility when I want to with my suppliers knows, but I know that I can do anything or something, and I just look at it as an investment if I can now socially and financially.
As we wrap up the group discussions, I'd like to ask our moderator and our panelists to join me back up here on the stage, please. Can you come back to the stage? Zia, could we have you guys come back to the stage? Sorry, thanks.
What is the perspective on exports as a whole?
All right, we're going to take a few minutes for the groups to just share back one of the ideas that they discussed during the last half hour. So we'll start with this group here. We have mic runners here. So can one of you in the group just take about 30 seconds or a minute to share one idea that you discussed in your group?
It's great. And you're going to inspire everyone. Just like you inspired us.
Okay, my name is Lucas Benitez. I'm not a farmer, but I'm a farm worker in Immokalee, Florida, and I represent the coalition of Immokalee workers. So we had a really good discussion here on our table, and we think that transparency and the whole supply chains is really, really important to see what happened in the whole industry, because and many times in this country, the small farmers suffer a lot because every year is less and less small family farms exist. So now our food is produced in the U.S., our tomatoes and vegetables and fruits, is produced by big agri-industries. So the small farmers, they don't have power to sell these products to the big corporations. So now we need to work very close with big corporations to create and design different methods to consume these products. So in our case, in Immokalee, we work very close with McDonald's, with Burger King, Walmart, and others to start the Fair Food Agreements, the Fair Food Nation, in chains, and we started to work in tomatoes industry, because 90% of tomatoes consumed in the United States during the winter came from Florida. So now we work very close with these big corporations to change the lives of thousands of farm workers in Southwest Florida and other 7 states. So I think the transparency is very important, because when E. coli problem happened in bell peppers, this happened real happened 2 years ago. These bell peppers came from Mexico. So the U.S. government followed the production, the whole system, the whole chains, and they identify the ranch, the farmer in Mexico. So they have the liability to follow this problem. So when the human rights violation happen, we don't have the same transparency to follow the whole supply chains to eliminate this problem. So,
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to the next group just in the interest of time. So we'll go to the group in the back. Thanks so much.
So we talked about smallholder farmers in Africa moving from subsistence to commercial and selling into local markets. And a couple of things came up. One was a discussion around irrigation and the advantage of what irrigation can do for a farmer by moving you from waiting for the rain and all harvesting at the same time, selling into a crowded market, to producing crops throughout the year, making farming a full-time business, and especially small-scale, low-cost irrigation technologies where you get high prices in the dry season. And this will get youth into farming, as we heard, because the youth want a full-time income from farming, and also reduces waste because you're no longer producing everything at the same time. So that's one thing we talked about. The other thing is that it's great to have new technologies, but we also need new knowledge. on what's the best way to get the knowledge and training to happen. And the suggestion here is really that farmer-to-farmer training to transfer the knowledge from lead farmers is a very, very cost-effective and proven way, and it's a bottom-up way which can work often better times than the sort of top-down, more expensive methods. So that's what we talked about.
Thank you. Could you pass the mic to the table in the middle?
Hi, we had a very lively discussion here at our table, and actually we found out that at that table we represent the entire supply chain. So our discussion then sort of gravitated to what Zia Khan mentioned about what is happening with these gaps, when you work with small-scale farmers, why are those not aligned? And so we were sort of discussing what would need to happen, what are these actors? And so Hershey's mentioned that they work mainly with aggregates, whereas McDonald's, they have more control over their own supply chain, working with many different actors. And then we were looking, how would such a structure look like? Where Hugh mentioned that they are working on systems where you have a combination between what does NGO philanthropy can do in combination with a system that is market-driven. How would that be combined? And how would those actors interact that it is highly attractive for NGO funding, but has a very clear market connection? And then we ended up by Glenn from the Nature Conservancy, who basically mentioned what is happening on the larger scale, that really sort of multi-stakeholder collaborations are really important, when you want to tap into tackling more the sustainable issues and CO2. So very lively discussion, but some very good hints on how can we start working on tackling those issues that we work in a multi-stakeholder collaboration for small-scale farmers and large organizations.
Great, thank you. Do you mind passing the mic to your table? If you could just stand up, that would, or stay seated. That's fine.
We talked about the whole supply chain thing, and then we got off on the subject of aquaponics, because I got interested in, after the Selma Montgomery March, I started meeting all these old guys that marched with us who are now my age, and they still own land, they still run their farms, but they can't spend 10 hours a day in a tractor. But we're trying to adapt them to aquaponics. And in a room this size, a field this size, you can grow more aquaponically than you can on 10, 20 acres of land. And they can do it with 2 hours a day. And we've discovered something that I first saw in Africa and then realized it was in my home state of Louisiana, duckweed. We found some moonshiners down there in Louisiana who were cooking it and making ethanol. But what was left was a 47.5% protein. Now, it has not been certified as humanly edible, but after Katrina, they fed it to the cows, and the cows all got fat. So we put it in cranberry juice, and so you can't see it, and drank it. And the Department of Agriculture says that about a heaping tablespoon of powdered duckweed has a similar protein to 4 ounces of steak or breast of chicken. And so what we're trying to do is put that in a bottle, and I'm meeting with Coca-Cola in the morning, and we were talking about one of the questions they have on my list is about how they can do something with their supply chain. So it all fits in, and I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation and an opportunity to see that all of these things are hooking up, and they do work out for the better, for good in the long run.
Thank you. All right, and the table in the front.
So we had an excellent conversation, but really to follow on from this table, we talked about the gap in funding between large corporations and the farmers on the ground. And Rockflower is a venture philanthropy fund for women and girls, and so really what I see as the gap is bringing philanthropic money into those women's grassroots organizations. And I think we were all in agreement that that's where a lot of the gap in the funding lies. And if we were able to bring that in, it would be a huge solution.
Great. Thanks so much. Huge round of applause to all the groups for sharing. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Raj to close out our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And we didn't solve all the world's agricultural supply chain issues by any means, but we seem to get into some themes here that are core. And we've got quite a collection of people in the room who know a lot about this. So I want to give our panelists a chance to get back into it. Give us a sense of what you learned. What are you starting to synthesize from these points? Kesavan, please.
Yeah. I think I go with the last table. Just want to share our experience. People think hydroponics is only suitable for places where there is no sun. Interestingly, we have been developing hydroponics typically to increase productivity 2.5 times. And the biggest advantage for what I need, I didn't talk too much about it because we are in a highly developing stage. But I genuinely believe if I can get into hydroponics, and what we have really done is, all the pots and stuff what we use for hydroponics, we actually made it locally with clay pots. So that there is nothing like a plastic in it, it's all clay pots, simple pipings, and we just keep recirculating. Just to give you an example, we tried green chilies, red chilies. Red chilies are pretty expensive. So actually it gets a good commodity market. So what we found is when we did red chilies on this small plot, we just took a 1,500 square meter plot. We didn't really go big. We suddenly found that our productivity was 3 times. If that was land, and the biggest advantage, right, he said is, it can be literally run by women and children. So I think I really go with to that. See, pardon me if I'm saying this, because I always run both at the home and the office by women. So I always give credit to them because I got a boss who is a woman, she is the owner of the company, and obviously the boss at home, you know who it is. So it's only women and children.
Well, if Mr. Andrew Young's distinguished career includes being a aquaponics farmer, we'll take that. Zia, did you want to comment on your thoughts? We're a little bit tight on time, but we'd love to hear.
I'll just
what you
share
learned.
one thought. It was really exciting to hear all the conversations. I think one of the underlying themes to this has been around partnerships. And the point we try and make, which may sound a little counterintuitive, is partnership is a discipline, it's not a value. So actually, we feel people jump into partnerships too easily and too readily because we want to partner. It feels like a good thing to do. But to be very disciplined about what's the specific goal, what capabilities people bring together, what intermediate success metrics will be, how will you solve the inevitable problems that come along, that's something that I encourage everyone to think about because it will take partnerships to solve all the systemic challenges that we talked about. But there's as much a risk of no partnerships happening as there is a risk of poor partnerships happening and being ineffective, and then we don't know how to get out of them, and that's what I call zombie partnerships, and we don't want those. So thanks everyone for the great thoughts, and I just hope you can carry that thought with you.
Thank you, Zia. And Earthrin.
Really good ideas, and I want to echo support for the things that my colleagues have said here. But I also want to add on what we've heard from the different groups is innovation and a recognition that there are any number of solutions out there to address the challenges, particularly the poorest of the smallholder farmers, which is where my interest lies. But a recognition that it's about focusing on the needs of those we serve and those who are the subject as opposed to our own individual needs alone, if we are going to make true sustainable difference. And I want to make one other comment, and that, well, two. One is on youth. Recognizing that, particularly in places like sub-Saharan Africa, where the average age of a farmer is over 60, is that we do need to make farming sexy. We do need to identify those new opportunities for engaging young people and attracting and keeping them in agriculture. And a recognition, last point, of the importance of women. The challenge of mechanization is that as soon as we get into mechanization, the men think farming's really sexy and push women out. And particularly when you're talking about poor farmers. And so how do we ensure that when we are creating these new innovative opportunities, that we always look through a gender lens and are ensuring that there's the capacity and opportunity for women to benefit? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, to me, this is a classic CGI session in that we picked on a topic that is so challenging. There's no way we're going to solve it in an hour and a half, but we've got in the room a lot of the people who are working on this every single day, including the people up on the stage. And I think if we are dedicated to the idea that this is a new moment, that technological advances, that new forms of financing, that an understanding really of what the supply chain is like and where the challenges are. I mean, there's this huge piece of low-hanging fruit. Forgive the pun, but it's there, and that is that, it's sort of like energy efficiency in the energy market. We can save on the waste. If we can save on the waste all along the chain, that's an enormous opportunity. So if we leave this room with nothing else other than the idea that we can do this, and the people in this room together, and that this is the moment, I think we've had a successful time together. And I want to thank these fantastic panelists, and all of you for your participation. Thank you.